Hey everyone, someone asked what would happen if everybody started getting rich off of their Bitcoin investments. Would that not cause inflation throughout the entire economy? The short answer is no, but the longer answer is complicated, which is why I'm doing a video about it. Okay. Uh, in, Inflation is caused by a debasement in the money supply. When a money is used as the measuring stick for the economy, and then whoever controls that money prints too much of it. That is what causes inflation. As Milton Friedman said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. That means if you ever see inflation ever, you know that either someone is currently printing too much money, or that in the past someone printed too much money and it's just taken some time to see the effects of that money printing. Okay, so what happens when, let's say, the price of Bitcoin goes from $102,000 per coin, where it is this morning, 102,000 to 204,000. Let's say it doubles, and the total value of all the Bitcoin in the world goes from $2.1 trillion to $4.2 trillion. Okay, so what you got to understand is the ratio of all of the monies in the world and the ratio of all the goods and services has to balance. So and the reason for that is money, the purchasing power of money is expressed in its ability to buy stuff. And the amount of stuff that could be bought, which is in economic terms, it's called goods and services. Although the more sort of easier to understand would be products and services. Products meaning something you could buy that's a physical thing or a digital thing or a something, and services being services that someone provides for you that you pay for. For example, somebody serves you at a restaurant, that is service. The food is a product, but the service where you don't have to cook it yourself is a service. So anyway, so the all of the money and all of the goods and services or products and services have to be in balance, because the money cannot have more purchasing power than the goods and services it could purchase, and the goods and services that could be purchased can't be more valuable than the purchasing power of all the money that could purchase them. Otherwise, where does that value come from, and where does that purchasing power come from? And all of this is massively oversimplified. So for all you economists that are listening, I know I'm massively oversimplifying this, for the purpose of making it understandable. I do understand there's more moving parts to each of these things. But okay, so if Bitcoin doubles and it goes, from 100,000 to 200,000, and all the Bitcoiners have double the purchasing power, the question is, where did that purchasing power come from? If the amount of money in the economy and the amount of goods and services has to balance, and all of the Bitcoiners, are now twice as rich, that means that came from somewhere. So where did it come from? Well, it came from a combination. The primary place it comes from is the people who get new money from the government have less purchasing power. So there's something called, it's spelled Cantillon. I'm not sure if it's the Cantillon effect or the Cantillon effect. I've heard people say it both ways. I'm sure that only one of them is right. But whether it's the Cantillon effect or the Cantillon effect, I think that's the right technical term. What it means is whoever is the closest to the money printer gets the most benefit from and the most purchasing power from new dollars. So if you think about it, during the 2008 recession, the Federal Reserve printed, the total sort of money in circulation. The M1, I think, money supply was like $2 trillion, and they doubled it to like $4 trillion. There's a bunch of different measures of money. So the question is, well, who got that extra $2 trillion? And the answer was that bankers and insurance companies and basically all the people who had taken too much risk as a result of the Fed keeping interest rates for too low in the early to mid 2000s, all of those people got huge bailouts. So a huge amount of money got pushed into the economy, and the purchasing power of those people went up first. Now, eventually, all of that money is going to cause inflation, but it causes inflation for other people later. So whoever is the closest to the money printer gets the most benefit from new purchasing power, and whoever is farthest from the money printer gets the least benefit from the new purchasing power. So give me 1 second, I'll explain that. So let's assume that the government, instead of giving all that to, trillions of dollars to bankers and insurance executives who took too much risk, again, in a lot of ways, it was not their fault. They took the risk based on low interest rates, and cheap credit. And the Federal Reserve was the one responsible for that, the low interest rates and cheap credit. So, you know, essentially they got enticed into their behavior. There was still bad behavior, but a lot of it was also sort of enticed into. But anyway, um, okay, so let's assume that the government instead decided that I was the person who should hand out the $2 trillion instead of bankers and insurance company executives and all that sort of stuff. And let's assume that they did that secretly, of course, because nobody wants to know that I'm the one who's got the $2 trillion that the government gave me. So 2008 rolls around, they give me $2 trillion, and they say, Joel, we need you to get this money out into the economy. Go spend it as fast as you can. Well, initially, none of the prices are going to increase because nobody knows that this money is basically magic funny money that got printed out of thin air. So for a little while, I get to go buy stuff at the old prices. But then over time, as I empty out the store shelves and I buy stuff and all of that, over time, what happens is the prices start rising for everyone. So the people who are then spending the money I gave them to buy their stuff, they have to buy things that are a little bit more expensive. And then the people who get the money sort of the third hand have to buy things that are even more expensive than that. And it's like a ripple effect. So when you throw a big rock into a lake, the biggest effect is closest to the impact of the rock, and then it ripples out, but the farther you get from the rock, the less effect. So it works the same way with purchasing power. If you drop a bunch of new money into an economy or give it to a bunch of bankers or insurance executives or whatever, they are going to start with the most purchasing power, and the purchasing power they get is being essentially pulled in from the poorest people who are going to get the money last. So the Cantillon effect or Cantillon effect, or however you say it, is worst for the poorest people that are farthest from the money printer, and it's best for the people that are closest to the money printer. So if the price of Bitcoin doubles and the purchasing power of all the Bitcoiners doubles, the number one place that they are getting that purchasing power is from people who would otherwise be closest to the money printer, because effectively purchasing power has now concentrated around the Bitcoin holders rather than around the people who are getting money for free from the government. Now, this effect is common anytime there's an increase in productivity. Anytime a company like Google decides to make search engines more effective and becomes incredibly wealthy, and a bunch of billionaires are born as a result of Google or something like that. The same thing happens. They have a lot of purchasing power, and it's a result of human productivity. They made the world more productive, therefore the world has more purchasing power. Therefore they do that. So if somebody gets more purchasing power as a result of smart investing, like buying Bitcoin, or as a result of making the world more productive, but like Google, and actually buying Bitcoin actually does make the world more productive as well, because as the world moves to a hard money standard, a sound money standard, which is Bitcoin, the entire economy becomes more efficient. And so part of that purchasing power comes from the fact that the economy is more efficient, and we are on basically everybody's using yardsticks that have 36 inches in them, instead of everybody using rulers, and some of the rulers have 11-inch measurements and some have 13, which is what we're doing with our current money supply. So when Bitcoin becomes more valuable, the people who lose are the people who would normally get free money but under the old standard, which is, the closer you are to Wall Street, the closer you are to Washington, D.C., and the closer you are to the Federal Reserve, are the people who are getting the extra purchasing power before inflation sort of eats it up for the rest of us. So those people are losing purchasing power as we move to Bitcoin. The other people who have the less purchasing power benefit. So the losers are the people who get to print the money. That's the losers. So where does the purchasing power come from if, Bitcoin increases in value from $2 trillion to $4 trillion? One, it comes away from the people who otherwise would be able to magically print money out of thin air. Those are the people who are like the losers of the Bitcoin appreciation. The people who win less, the purchasing power shifts toward the Bitcoiners and away from the late adopters. So everybody on a Bitcoin standard eventually wins, except the people that were getting free money from the government as a result of their proximity to the government, meaning they could use their power to get the government to give them money, whether in the form of subsidies, whether in the form of handouts, tax breaks that are unique to them or their industry that don't apply to the rest of us. Those are the losers. But the people who just benefit less than the Bitcoiners are the late adopters. So everybody eventually benefits because everybody moves to a yardstick that's got 36 inches on it. Everybody benefits from using a measuring system, a unit of weights and measures that is uniform and that is solid. And that, imagine how hard it would be to build a house if every year the length of a ruler that is supposed to be 12 inches, if they added a quarter of an inch every year. And of course, the promise would be we're doing this to make you wealthy because everybody's house is getting a little bit taller every year. Or I guess a little bit shorter if you like, or, taller if you like, made it less. Anyway, um, so regardless, if you manipulate it, you can make it feel to people like, hey, your house is getting bigger, but the truth is the measuring stick is getting smaller. The same thing's happening with money. Everybody feels like the price of their house is going up and their stock portfolio is going up. Most of that is not true. Your house and your stock portfolio are mostly not getting more valuable. The measuring stick that you're using to measure them is getting shorter. And so you're like, wow, my house, used to be, 2 stories tall or 1 story tall 10 years ago, but now there's an extra little story in my house. It's like, no, it's just that the ruler went from, 12 inches to 6 inches. So now instead of your house being, whatever, 16 feet tall, now it's 32 feet tall, but that's only because we changed the unit of weights and measures. So that's what's going on there. So as a result of it, everybody benefits by moving to a sound money standard like Bitcoin. The only actual losers are the people who are no longer able to print free money out of thin air, and the people who are close to those people who get the money first. Those people are the ones that lose the purchasing power. The rest of the purchasing power shift comes from late adopters to early adopters, but everybody ultimately benefits. So you know, if somebody said, and I'll get back to the question of inflation in a minute here, but if somebody said, if Bitcoin increases from 100,000 a coin to $200,000 a coin, someone has to lose. I would say you are correct. Someone does have to lose. The loser is whoever can't print money out of thin air anymore, which is the Federal Reserve and the cronies that are closest to the Federal Reserve and all the grifters that are making money off of this money printing system that exists in Washington that's facilitated by Wall Street and all of that. Those are the losers. And if somebody said, yeah, but there's not, the purchasing power of other people has to be changing also, I would say yes. Other than the losers, everyone else wins in the long term, but the earlier adopters of Bitcoin win more. And now, if somebody says that's not fair, well, I would say, well, that's the way everything works. The first adopters of the internet to do accounting and finance and audit became way more efficient than the people who stuck with paper systems. And therefore, they had purchased the early adopters of any technology have more purchasing power than the late adopters of the technology. The early adopters of any new monetary system have more purchasing power than the late adopters of any new monetary system. The people who get education earlier in their life make more money than the people who get education later in their life. So anything that increases your productivity or that involves you moving to more, a better unit of weights and measures or more sophisticated tools, anything that moves you forward gives you more purchasing power as compared to a later adopter. So Bitcoin is not unfair in that way. It's just operating the exact same way any other technology works. And the same will be true of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is amazing. It's extremely powerful. I use ChatGPT probably dozens of times a day. Everybody that uses ChatGPT or one of the other AI engines to do their job becomes more efficient, and over time gets more purchasing power. Eventually, everybody uses AI and everyone's better off. But the people who are the result of the productivity gains from AI are the early adopters. The people who are late adopters to AI will not have the same bump in productivity that the early adopters do, because by the time the late adopters get around to it, everybody else is already adopted. Okay, so getting back to inflation, how does this affect inflation? Well, so what happens is the Cantillon effect or Cantillon effect or whatever it's called, um, again, it means you're better off if you're closer to the money printer. So those people are harmed, meaning they have less purchasing power. They're not actually harmed. They just, they don't get free money anymore under a Bitcoin standard. So those people, they lose purchasing power and the Bitcoiners gain it. Prices in US dollar terms do rise over time on a Bitcoin standard, but that is because the dollar is not scarce. So that's going to happen anyway. And whether people move to a gold standard, a Bitcoin standard, any standard you move to that does not involve, somebody magically money printing, uh, is going to result in prices rising. And the existing system that does involve magic money printing involves prices rising. So you have to look at what prices are rising. The prices are not rising as measured in ounces of gold. Prices are not rising as measured in Bitcoin. So on all of the prices in the world are already falling over time as measured by scarce money. The only reason the prices are rising is because they're measured in US dollars that are not scarce. So as we move to a hard money system, the US dollar prices will continue to rise, but that is not the fault of Bitcoin or of gold or of any sound money. That is the fault of the US dollar and the people who control it because they will not stop printing money. And that's just going to keep happening. So back to the original thesis is, does Bitcoin cause inflation? The answer is no. It shifts purchasing power away from the money printer and toward the adopters of new technology. Um, it shifts that purchasing power, but it does not, Bitcoin does not increase aggregate purchasing power in the near term. It does in the long term because the economy works way better on a sound money system. Um, and will prices in US dollar terms rise under a gold standard or I should say under a gold standard where gold is not tied? Let me back up. Most people think gold standard means the US dollar is based on gold. So let me use my words more carefully. Will the prices rise as measured in ounces of gold? No. Will the prices rise as measured in Bitcoin? No. Will the prices rise as measured in US dollars? Yes, unless the US dollar is tied to gold or to Bitcoin or to something scarce. So as long as the dollars are not tied to something scarce, the prices will rise in dollar terms. But again, that's not a problem because all you have to do is switch to a sound money. So that doesn't apply to you. So if somebody said, yeah, but as Bitcoin's purchasing power increases, the US dollar cost of everything is increasing, I would say, yeah, there's a very simple solution to that. Whoever has a problem with that should switch to a Bitcoin standard because then their prices are falling with the rest of us. So it's the same way again with AI. Somebody said, "Well, this is not fair." It's my friend who hates AI keeps having a harder time making ends meet. I would say, yeah, that's going to keep happening. If you don't adopt AI and everybody else is, then it's going to be harder and harder for you to make money. And there we go. The response would be, well, what is my friend supposed to do? The answer is, adopt AI. Like it's not hard. If if your life is getting harder to live because other people are adopting new technology, the answer is not to stop the new technology. The answer is to adopt the new technology by the people who are having a hard time living on the old technology. So if people are having a hard time making ends meet using US dollars because the prices keep going up in US dollars, the solution is, well, why don't you change to the technology that doesn't inflate that way? That's the solution. So if you're getting left behind by AI, get on the AI train. If you're getting left behind because the whole world switched to computers and you're stuck using paper systems, the answer is switch to computers. Like that is the answer. And if the answer is you're getting left behind because the US dollar price of everything is rising, the answer is stop using the US dollar as the way you price things. Use Bitcoin so that your prices start falling. Like that's how all technology works. That's not unique to Bitcoin. That is the way all technology works. Is the answer is, get on the train, and the faster you get on the train, the easier it is to keep up. I'll make one last point. One second. All right. So there's an important concept that's hard to understand, but worth thinking about, which is there's a famous saying that when the money is plentiful, the goods and services are scarce. And when the money is scarce, the goods and services are plentiful. Okay, so let me give a very brief what that means. What that means is the more money you print, the poorer everybody gets. So look at every country, Venezuela, Turkey, Argentina before Javier Milei, every country where the money is plentiful, meaning they're printing lots of it, is getting poorer by the day. So if money printing made people wealthy, the wealthiest countries would be Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Cyprus. Like these countries are in a horrible way with extreme poverty and everybody having a really tough time. And the reason is because the money is plentiful. The money is plentiful, so the goods and services are scarce because you can't run an economy where the measuring stick of value is constantly being inflated. The same way you cannot build buildings if the measuring stick of distance and space is constantly being inflated. And it's the same way you cannot run an economy if time, you know, well, let's say the government woke up one day and said, the problem is there's not enough hours in a day. So from now on, every single year, we're going to add 1 hour to the day. It would throw the entire system into chaos. Productivity would drop massively as a result of the government trying to add time to the day by defining the second as 70 seconds instead of 60, or defining a day as 25 hours instead of 24. It would throw everything into chaos. Night and day, we'd all get mixed up because, the sun would start to set at the 24-hour mark, but the government would have mandated that the day was 25 hours. And so, over time, we'd end up working during what is currently 9 hours. It would be chaos. So, if time is plentiful, productivity is scarce. If money is plentiful, goods and services are scarce. If distance is plentiful, it's hard to travel. If measurement is plentiful, it gets hard to build things. You have to have a finite unit of measure of time, of energy, of space, of value, and Bitcoin is that measure of value. So, does Bitcoin, if everybody got rich on Bitcoin, does that mean inflation? No, it just means that the U.S. dollar price of everything is rising, but that is not inflation as a result of people having a hard time buying things. That is just the purchasing power shifting from U.S. dollars to Bitcoin. And the same thing would happen if we went onto a gold standard that was not connected to the U.S. dollar. If we started measuring everything in ounces of gold, the same thing would happen. The prices in ounces of gold would go down, just like they're going down in Bitcoin, but the prices in U.S. dollars would go up. But again, I guess I don't call that inflation in the same way. The U.S. dollar is going to lose purchasing power no matter what you do. I mean, that's inevitable regardless, because they're never going to stop printing money. The question is, do you stay on that standard or do you switch to a standard where that is not happening to you? So, complicated issue. I've attempted to massively oversimplify it. Sorry for the areas where I'm not exactly technologically and economically precise due to the complexity of the issue, but hopefully this was still helpful. Thanks, everyone.